Imagine being thrown into a situation that changes your life forever, with no warning, no explanation, and no way to prepare. That's exactly what happened to me on a fateful Tuesday night in March, when my whole world was turned upside down. Welcome back to Untold Revealed. Hit that subscribe button if you're new here, and if you're enjoying this so far, smash that like button. It really helps us out. I'm Ashley, a 34-year-old registered nurse in a small town in western North Carolina, and this is a story that's been a decade in the making. It started with a porch light and a baby I never expected, a baby who would become the center of my universe. 10 years ago, my sister left her newborn daughter on my porch and disappeared, leaving me to pick up the pieces. My parents, instead of offering support, told me the baby was my problem, and I was left to raise her on my own. But that's not where the story ends. It's where it begins. As I look back, I remember that night like it was yesterday. I was 24, fresh off a 12-hour shift at Blue Ridge Community Health, the kind of shift that leaves you exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I pulled into my driveway at 11:15, and the first thing I noticed was the porch light, which I always left on, but it was what was sitting on my welcome mat that caught my attention. An infant car seat with a pale yellow padding and a lavender blanket tucked tight around a tiny breathing baby. I dropped my bag and knelt down, my nurse instincts kicking in as I checked the baby's vitals without even thinking about it. She was asleep, maybe 2 weeks old, with tiny fists curled near her chin and skin still blotchy and new. I pressed 2 fingers to her chest, watched for rhythm, and checked her respirations. Steady, warm, and fed recently, from the look of it. And then I saw the note, folded once and tucked into the side of the carrier between the handle and the padding. It was lined notebook paper, torn at the edge, and I recognized the handwriting before I even read the words. It was my sister's loopy cursive, the same one she used on birthday cards she never mailed on time. The note was brief, just a name, an instruction, and a signature. Her name is Lauren. I can't do this. Don't look for me. A. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no phone number, just a name and a warning. I looked up and down the street, but it was quiet, with only a few porch lights on and no movement. My sister's car was gone, and I had no idea when she'd been there. It could have been 10 minutes, or it could have been 2 hours. I scooped Lauren out of the carrier and held her against my chest, feeling a sense of responsibility wash over me. She stirred but didn't wake, and I called 911 with my free hand, trying to process what was happening. I also called my parents, but my mom's phone went to voicemail at 3 a.m. I called twice more, but nothing. My dad finally picked up on the 4th try, his voice thick with sleep. I told him everything, the carrier, the note, the baby, and he was quiet for a long time. "I'll talk to your mother," he said, and hung up. By sunrise, I'd fed Lauren formula from a can of Amphimil I bought at the 24-hour Walmart in Valdez, still in my scrubs, with a newborn in a carrier on the checkout belt. The cashier gave me a look I pretended not to see, but I knew I had a long road ahead of me. Now this is where it gets interesting. My family's reaction to the baby's arrival would set off a chain of events that would change our lives forever. You won't believe what happens next, so stay tuned. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. It's going to be a wild ride. But here's the crazy part. That courtroom scene I mentioned earlier, the one where the judge held the file with both hands, was just the beginning of the end. The first chapter started on that Tuesday night in March, with a porch light and a baby I didn't expect. And as I look back, I realize that my family's secrets and lies would eventually come to light, changing everything I thought I knew about them and about myself. Which part of the story resonates with you the most so far? Drop it in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. I pulled up to my parents' house at 8, with Lauren asleep in the back seat. The 20-minute drive on Route 18 had given me plenty of time to think, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. As I stepped out of the car, I couldn't help but notice that their house looked exactly the same. A brick ranch, with an American flag on the mailbox, and azaleas that my sister Madison had planted the year I graduated from high school. I carried Lauren to the front door and knocked, my heart racing with anticipation. My dad opened the door, but instead of a warm welcome, he stood aside, making room for my mom to appear behind him. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was set in a way that made my heart sink. She didn't even glance at Lauren, and her words cut deep. Your sister made her choice. We warned her about Timothy. We told her that man was beneath her. She didn't listen. This is a baby. She's your burden now. The words felt like a door slamming shut, leaving me stunned and unsure of what to do next. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. I looked at my dad, hoping he would say something, anything, to ease the tension. But he just stood there, his hand on the doorframe, his knuckles white. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, saying nothing. My mom, on the other hand, was firm in her stance. Alexis made her mess. We're not cleaning it up, she said, before shutting the door in my face. I stood on that porch, holding Lauren, for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. Then, I turned around and went back to the car, where Lauren was still sleeping peacefully. I sat behind the wheel, with the engine off, and made 2 decisions that would change everything. I would call Child Protective Services, and I would ask them to place Lauren with me. But here's the crazy part. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The next afternoon, a social worker named Danielle came to my apartment. She was in her mid-40s, with practical shoes and a clipboard thick with forms. She walked through my 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment, checking everything from the smoke detectors to the locks to the water temperature. She asked me where the baby would sleep, and I showed her the 2nd bedroom, which was empty except for a dresser and a box fan. I told her I could have a crib by tomorrow, thanks to a co-worker who had one in storage. Danielle nodded, made a note, and asked me about my employment. I told her I was a registered nurse at Blue Ridge Community Health, and she made another note. She explained the process of kinship placement and how Lauren could stay with me while CPS investigated. If Alexis didn't surface and no other family stepped forward, we could move toward formal guardianship. Now this is where it gets interesting. I was about to become a full-time parent, and I had no idea if I was ready. I signed the temporary placement papers that evening, with Lauren sleeping in a borrowed bassinet beside the kitchen table. The first week was a whirlwind of activity as I tried to adjust to my new role. I called my supervisor, Dr. Nguyen, and asked to switch from night shifts to days. She didn't hesitate, telling me to take the time I needed. I cut everything I could from my budget. No more gym membership, no more eating out, no more streaming services. Formula and diapers became line items in a spreadsheet I kept on my phone. 5 in the morning became my new anchor, with coffee brewing in the dark and Lauren in the crook of my arm. The kitchen smelled like Folgers and Similac, and I learned to do everything one-handed, pouring coffee, checking my phone, folding a burp cloth. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. Raising Lauren was like triage. You stop the bleeding first, and you ask questions later. Lauren smiled at 6 weeks, rolled over at 4 months, and said something close to Ma at 9 months. I pretended it counted, even though it might have been gas. By her first birthday, I had a rhythm going. Morning shift at the clinic, Lauren at the church daycare 3 blocks away, pick up at 4, dinner, bath, books, and bed. Dr. Tram brought over bags of clothes her own daughter had outgrown, and the nurses at the clinic threw me a belated baby shower in the break room. There was cake from Food Lion, a stack of onesies, and a gift card to Target that made me cry in the bathroom after everyone went back to their patients. You won't believe what happens next. I started sending my parents a photo of Lauren every month via email because my mom didn't text and my dad barely checked his phone. Which part of this story resonates with you the most? Drop it in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. I'd send the same update every month, just a simple photo of Lauren with a brief message. My mom never responded, not even once. My dad, on the other hand, replied exactly once when Lauren was 7 months old. His response was brief. She looks healthy. That was it. No follow-up, no visit, no phone call. I kept all these emails in a folder labeled Family. It was my way of documenting everything. I also tried to track down Alexis, but her old number was still disconnected. I searched for her on social media, asked mutual friends from high school if they'd heard from her, and even checked with the sheriff's office. They told me they'd filed a missing person report, but since Alexis was an adult who'd left voluntarily, there was nothing they could do. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. But here's the crazy part. By the time Lauren was a year old, I decided to take a big step. I filed for temporary legal guardianship, and a family law attorney named Catherine took my case at a reduced rate. She had 20 years of experience and a wealth of knowledge, and she told me something that stuck with me. Document everything, because you never know when the people who weren't there will try to rewrite the story. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button. It really helps me know you're invested in what's happening. Catherine's words of wisdom rang in my ears as I navigated the complex world of family law. The hearing was held in Burke County Family Court, a small courtroom with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed when the heating kicked on. Karen stood beside me, and Lauren sat in her carrier on the bench, chewing on a teething ring. Alexis had been served by publication, which is basically like shouting into a canyon and waiting for an echo that never comes. She didn't respond, didn't appear, didn't send a lawyer or a letter. It was like she'd given up all rights to her daughter. My parents were notified through their attorney, and Madison's response arrived in a letter. Karen read it aloud in the courtroom. "We do not oppose guardianship, but we request no further contact regarding this matter." The judge, a young man with glasses, paused on the last line and looked at me. "Is the respondent, is the mother, aware she's relinquishing involvement?" he asked. Karen spoke up. "The letter speaks for itself, Your Honor." He signed the order, granting me temporary legal guardianship of Lauren Rose Porter. Karen put her hand on my shoulder in the hallway and said, "This is step one. Now this is where it gets interesting." I carried Lauren out of the courthouse into the bright March sunlight, the same month she'd been left on my porch. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running, Lauren asleep in the back seat, and I let myself feel the weight of responsibility. It wasn't sadness or victory, just the gravity of being responsible for this child in a way that had a judge's signature behind it. I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and went to the grocery store because we were out of bananas. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. It's about to get even more intense. Years 2 and 3 were defined by what didn't happen. I kept sending monthly emails, updating my parents on Lauren's life, her second Christmas, her first day at daycare, the afternoon she fell off a step stool and needed 3 stitches above her eyebrow. 96 emails over 8 years, ultimately. I counted them later, when it mattered. My mom didn't reply, not once. My dad sent a Christmas card the second year, a store-bought one with poinsettias on the front, signed Dad in blue ink. No note, no message, no mention of Lauren. The third year, nothing at all. But then, something unexpected happened. Alexis surfaced once, in the second year. My phone rang at 10 at night and the caller ID showed a Charlotte area code. "Ashley, it's me," she said, her voice sounding the same, light, slightly rushed, like she was always halfway out the door. She didn't ask about Lauren, though. She asked if I could wire her $300 for a security deposit. I was taken aback, and I asked her, "Do you want to know about your daughter?" The line went quiet for 5 seconds, and I was left wondering what she was thinking. Which part of this story resonates with you the most? Drop it in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. I want to hear your thoughts. Then, without warning, she hung up the phone. It was a pattern that would repeat itself the following year. She'd call, needing $500 for rent, speaking quickly, and never once asking about Lauren. But this time, I decided to ask her directly. "Alexis, Lauren is walking and talking now, and she asks about you. Do you want to see her?" Alexis's voice took on a sharp edge. "You owe me," she said. "You have my kid." I kept my tone calm and even. "She's not leverage, Alexis. She's a child." But Alexis just hung up again. I had recorded both calls, thanks to North Carolina being a one-party consent state. Karen had advised me to log the dates, times, duration, and summaries of each call in a spreadsheet. And what those calls revealed was striking. Each time, Alexis knew exactly where Lauren was and how to reach me, but she only contacted me when she needed money. She never asked about Lauren's daily life, her favorite foods, or her bedtime routine. It was as if Lauren was just a means to an end. Now this is where it gets interesting. As the years went by, Lauren grew into a bright and curious child. By year 3, she could count to 20, loved applesauce, and called me Mama. Around that time, Karen filed a petition for the involuntary termination of Alexis's parental rights, citing willful abandonment under North Carolina statute. The fact was, Alexis had gone 6 consecutive months without any meaningful contact, support, or attempt to resume parenting. She was served by publication again, but the silence was deafening. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. The hearing was brief, with the judge reviewing the CPS record, my guardianship file, and the documented absence. He terminated Alexis's parental rights, effective immediately. But here's the thing, Alexis could have fought it. She could have hired a lawyer, filed a response, or shown up in court with a plan. She could have simply called and said she wanted to be a mother. But she did none of those things. Instead, the adoption proceedings followed, and Karen handled the paperwork. I brought Lauren to the courthouse for the finalization hearing, where a kind-eyed judge asked Lauren if she knew what was happening. Lauren held my hand and said, "Mama said I'm getting adopted." The judge smiled, signed the decree, and sealed the record by court order. And just like that, I became Ashley Elaine Porter, the legal adoptive mother of Lauren Rose Porter. You won't believe what happens next. As we walked out of the courthouse, Lauren pointed at the flagpole in front of the building. "That's a big flag, Mama," she said. I smiled and replied, "It is." That night, I left the porch light on, just like I always did. It had become a habit, one that I never really thought about. But as Lauren, now 3 years old and officially mine in the eyes of the law, pressed her nose against the screen door, she said, "Light on, Mama," and I replied, "Yes, it is." I thought the hard part was over, that I'd finally earned some peace. But family has a way of reappearing exactly when they smell something valuable. If you've ever been the reliable one in a family full of runners, you know what I mean. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of the story. As the years passed, Lauren grew into a bright and curious child. By the time she was 7, she was a reader, devouring chapter books the way other kids devoured chicken nuggets, fast, messy, and with total commitment. Her teacher, Mrs. Harding, told me at the fall conference that Lauren read at a 5th grade level and had an opinion about everything, delivered politely but firmly. I recognized that spark in her, and our morning routine had settled into something I could set a clock by. Every day at 5 a.m., I'd have coffee in the dark, and Lauren would pad into the kitchen 10 minutes later in bare feet, climbing into a chair, cereal bowl already waiting. She'd eat and tell me about her dreams while I drank my coffee and made her lunch. Which part of Lauren's story resonates with you the most so far? Drop it in the comments below and let's keep the conversation going. I used to dream about a magical castle, but with a twist. The moat was filled with orange juice. It sounds like a sticky situation, but trust me, it was delicious. Our little house on Avery Road was nothing fancy, just a small rental with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, but it was filled with Lauren's colorful drawings taped to the fridge, a bookshelf overflowing with library books, and a kitchen table where we shared countless meals and played Uno on Friday nights. I had just gotten a promotion at the clinic, which meant a slightly bigger paycheck, not a fortune, but enough to cover the essentials like braces, field trips, and a savings account that I added to every month. Lauren knew she was adopted, and I had told her about it when she was just 5 years old, using simple words that she could understand. I explained that her birth mother couldn't take care of her, and that I had chosen to be her mama. She thought about it for a day, and then she said something that melted my heart. "You're my real mama." I didn't correct her, because in my eyes she was right. This was also the year that Timothy Garrett entered our lives. At first I didn't know much about him, just that he had sent me a letter with a return address in Hickory, about 40 minutes east of us. His handwriting was unfamiliar, but it was neat and careful, the kind of penmanship that comes from writing invoices by hand. He introduced himself as a contractor who built decks, additions, and custom homes in the Catawba Valley. His letter was straightforward, explaining that he had dated Lauren's birth mother, Alexis, about 8 years ago before she left town. He had no idea that she was pregnant, and he didn't find out about Lauren's existence until a mutual friend saw a photo of her at a school event and noticed the resemblance. Timothy wrote that he was shocked, and he asked if I would be willing to talk to him. He didn't make any demands or threats, and he didn't mention lawyers or rights. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. I called my friend Catherine, who's a lawyer, to get her advice on the situation. She told me that Timothy had no legal claim to Lauren since the adoption was final, but if I wanted to let him into Lauren's life, that was my choice to make. I thought about it for a week, weighing the pros and cons, and then I decided to call Timothy. We met at a diner in Drexel, which is roughly halfway between Morganton and Hickory. He was a big guy, with broad shoulders and calloused hands, and he was quiet in a way that made me feel at ease. He wasn't shy, just efficient with his words. He brought a photo of himself as a kid, and the resemblance to Lauren was striking. Same wide-set eyes, same stubborn chin. We agreed to do a DNA test, and the results came back in just 10 days. Timothy Allen Garrett was indeed Lauren's biological father. He didn't celebrate or get emotional, but instead he just sat across from me and said, "I missed everything. I want to do right by her." We set some ground rules for their meetings, supervised visits once a month, and he would introduce himself as Mr. Timothy without any pressure on Lauren to call him father unless she chose to. He agreed to everything without hesitation. Now this is where it gets interesting. Timothy showed up every single time without fail. First Saturday of every month, rain or shine, he'd park his work truck in my driveway with the Garrett construction decal on the door. He'd bring Lauren books about building things, like how bridges work and how houses stand up in storms. She loved those books, and she'd pepper him with questions about whether you could build a treehouse that was also a library. With enough lumber, he'd say, anything is possible. As time went on, I started to notice that Timothy was really careful around me, respectful of my boundaries, and never overstepped. He never lingered too long, or tried to play a role that wasn't his yet. After 4 months, I let him take Lauren to the park, still supervised, but it was a start. After 8 months, she showed him her report card, and he was so proud of her that he framed it in his office. You won't believe what happens next, so hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of the story. Timothy was patient, and he didn't rush anything, which I appreciated. He just showed up month after month, and slowly but surely, he was building a relationship with Lauren. It was a fragile thing, but it was real, and it was growing. As I watched them interact, I realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, one that would be full of surprises, challenges, and opportunities. But here's the crazy part. Despite the uncertainty, despite the risks, I felt a sense of hope, a sense that we were all in this together and that somehow we would figure it out. Which part of Lauren's story resonates with you the most so far? Let me know in the comments, and we'll keep the conversation going. As I sat on my porch, watching Lauren chase a butterfly across the grass, Timothy dropped a bombshell. He'd set up a trust fund for Lauren, a whopping $80,000 to start, and named me as the sole trustee. I was taken aback, but what really got me was that he'd also taken out life insurance, with Lauren as the beneficiary. But here's the crazy part. He'd made sure to cover all his bases, including a notarized affidavit stating that Alexis had abandoned Lauren and that under no circumstances should the trust be transferred to anyone else. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. I didn't realize at the time just how important those documents would become. 6 months later, Timothy mentioned having some chest tightness during a visit. My nurse instincts kicked in, and I told him to see a cardiologist ASAP. But like many men in their 30s, he brushed it off, thinking it was just stress from work. Now this is where it gets interesting. 3 weeks later, I received a devastating phone call from Timothy's business partner, Dale Burris. Timothy had collapsed on a job site, and despite the paramedics' best efforts, he'd suffered a massive heart attack at just 35 years old. I was in shock, sitting on the edge of my bed, holding the phone against my ear, trying to process the news. Lauren was in the kitchen, eating her cereal, completely unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. I had to break the news to her after school, and it was heartbreaking to see her sit on the couch, crying quietly, her shoulders shaking with each sob. She'd barely known Timothy, but in the short time they'd had together, he'd made a profound impact on her life. The probate process took almost a year to settle, and it was a complex web of Timothy's estate, his construction business, life insurance, and personal savings. But in the end, I was confirmed as the sole trustee of the Education Trust, and Lauren's future was secured. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. As I read Timothy's obituary in the Hickory Daily Record, I felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, and grief. The last line read, "Survived by a daughter, Lauren." It was a poignant reminder of the impact Timothy had on our lives. But what I didn't know at the time was that someone else was reading those same words, and it would change everything. The weeks following Timothy's death were quiet, but not peaceful, just a numbing sense of grief. Lauren pulled inward, still going through the motions of daily life, but the spark was gone. She slept with the same lavender blanket every night, the one she'd been wrapped in when Alexis left her on my porch all those years ago. It was threadbare now, with patches that didn't match, but Lauren didn't care. It was her anchor to a past she couldn't quite remember. One night, she climbed into my bed, something she hadn't done since she was 6, and whispered into the dark, "Mama, why do people leave?" Which part of this story resonates with you the most? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. I turned over and gently brushed her hair back, trying to comfort her. "Sometimes people aren't ready to face things," I explained. "Sometimes they're scared, and sometimes they don't get a choice." She thought about that for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. "Mr. Timothy didn't get a choice," she said, and I nodded in agreement. "No, baby, he didn't." She eventually fell asleep with the blanket bunched up under her chin, and I lay there for an hour, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. I was managing grief on 3 different levels: mine, Lauren's, and the overwhelming bureaucracy of probate paperwork stacked on the kitchen counter. The next morning, I sat at the table and started filing trust documents. Every receipt, every form, every letter from the estate attorney. It was all so overwhelming. My binder, the one Catherine had told me to keep years ago, was getting thick. It had started as a simple folder of emails and CPS reports, but now it held guardianship orders, adoption decrees, trust paperwork, and Timothy's affidavit. It was about 3 inches of proof that one person had shown up and cared. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. The letter from Timothy's estate attorney arrived on a Thursday, and it was formal, with fancy stationery and everything. Inside, I found the finalized trust document confirmation, which stated that the trust was held for Lauren Rose Porter's education and welfare, with me, Ashley Elaine Porter, as the sole trustee. But the letter also contained something I hadn't fully read before. Timothy's affidavit, the notarized original, filed with the trust, was now part of the permanent record. I sat at the kitchen table and read every word, taking it all in. I, Timothy Allen Garrett, father of Lauren Rose Porter by birth, do hereby attest that Lauren's birth mother, Alexis Marie Porter, abandoned the child within 2 weeks of birth. I did not learn of Lauren's existence until she was 7 years old. Since that time, I have maintained regular contact and financial support exclusively through Ashley Elaine Porter, Lauren's adoptive mother, who has provided sole, continuous, and devoted care for the entirety of Lauren's life. The final paragraph really got to me. It stated that it was Timothy's explicit wish that I, Ashley Elaine Porter, remain Lauren's sole legal guardian and trustee. Under no circumstances should custody or trust management be transferred to Alexis Marie Porter or to Madison and Robert Porter, who declined involvement in the child's life and refused repeated invitations to participate in her upbringing. He'd even underlined the words "under no circumstances" twice. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the binder between the adoption decree and the trust documents. Then I closed the binder and locked it in the filing cabinet beside my bed. Lauren was in her room doing homework, with a lavender blanket draped over the back of her desk chair, just like she always kept it close. I read Timothy's words 3 times, not because they surprised me, but because they felt like armor I didn't know I'd been fitted for. But here's the crazy part. I didn't know how Alexis found out about the trust. Later, Catherine traced it back to Timothy's obituary, which was published in the Hickory Daily Record and open to anyone with an internet connection. It listed his full name, his business, and a single line at the bottom. Survived by a daughter, Lauren. Probate records in North Carolina are public, so Alexis was able to search the Burke County Court filings online and find the trust summary. Not the full document, but enough to get an idea of the beneficiary's name and the approximate value. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Alexis called my mother that same week. I know this because Madison told me later in court, when it no longer mattered what she admitted. Alexis's pitch was simple. Did you know Lauren's father left her almost $300,000? Madison's response, by her own account, was, "What?" Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of the story. I'm curious to know, what do you think about Alexis's actions so far? Let me know in the comments. Alexis's actions were about to take a dramatic turn, and I was not prepared for what was to come. You won't believe what happens next, so stay tuned. Which part of this story resonates with you the most so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. Imagine the scene. Alexis, sitting at my parents' kitchen table, a place where I'd spent countless mornings as a kid, eating cereal and getting ready for school. Madison was across from her, and Robert was in the corner, trying to blend into the background. But here's the thing. This wasn't a casual get-together. Alexis had an agenda, and she laid it out for them. If they could get custody of Lauren, or even just shared custody, they could try to change the trustee of her trust fund. It was a clever move, but it was all about the math, not about reconnecting as a family. Alexis had already hired a lawyer, Russell Drake, who specialized in family law and had a reputation for being aggressive. She'd paid a hefty retainer, and it was clear she was building a case against me. But then she decided to extend an olive branch. It was a Saturday morning when she showed up at my house, hoping to see Lauren. I was in the kitchen, and Lauren was out at a friend's house for a play date. Alexis didn't know that, and when she saw the empty driveway, she must have been disappointed. She stood on my porch, wearing a pressed blouse and pearl earrings, with a smile that looked like she'd practiced it in the mirror. I opened the screen door, but I didn't invite her in. "Ashley," she said, trying out my name like it was a new flavor. "I know I've been gone, and I know I've made mistakes, but I've changed. I want to be part of Lauren's life." She paused, tilting her head in a way that was all too familiar. "We're her real family," she said, and the words hung in the air like a challenge. "You've been gone for 10 years, Alexis," I reminded her. "I know, and She trailed off, and I cut in. "You didn't call on her birthday, not once, not one time." Alexis's jaw tightened, just slightly, the way it always did when things weren't going her way. But she recovered fast. "Mom and Dad want to see her too," she said. "We all do. We've been talking, and..." Now this is where it gets interesting. She brought up my parents and how they wanted to see Lauren. But I knew the truth. My mom had once told me that Lauren was a burden, and that was a hard thing to forget. "People change," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I'll think about it," I told Alexis, and I closed the screen door, watching as she walked back to her car. It was a white Lexus sedan with a Charlotte dealership frame, and she sat in the driver's seat for a minute before pulling away. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button. It helps me know you're engaged. I called Catherine as soon as Alexis was gone, and she listened to the whole story. When I finished, she said something that put everything into perspective. If Alexis has already hired a lawyer, she's not here for a reunion. She's here to build a case. And that's exactly what happened. The next week, my phone started ringing nonstop. Madison called first, her voice warm and friendly for the first time in 8 years. "We've been meaning to reach out, sweetheart," she said. "We miss our granddaughter, and we'd love to see her. But here's the thing, 8 years of silence, and now I was suddenly, sweetheart." I kept my voice level, trying not to show my emotions. "I appreciate that, Mom," I said. "Lauren's doing well, and I'm open to a supervised visit at a neutral location if you're interested." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Madison said, "Supervised? We're her grandparents. You requested no further contact." and your letter is on file with the court." I didn't back down. I just repeated what I'd said before. Alexis texted me photos of toys and gifts, including a stuffed unicorn and a purple backpack with Lauren's name on it. "For when we visit," she wrote. I didn't reply to the text, but I saved it, just in case. Robert called separately, his voice awkward and stilted, like he was reading from a script. "Your mother and I think it's time we all sat down as a family for Lauren's sake," he said. "Now I know what you're thinking. What's going to happen next? Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of the story. I'd love to have that family meeting, Dad. I've been asking you to come for 8 years now." But he didn't have a response to that. I took all the evidence to Karen, and she laid it out on her desk. Texts, call logs, emails. She started drawing a timeline on a legal pad, explaining that they're trying to create a narrative for the judge. They want to make it seem like they tried to be involved, but I'm the one who shut them out. Every message they send me is going to be used as evidence in court. Karen's advice was clear: respond to everything in writing, always be polite, and never accept anything without conditions. I need to create a paper trail that shows I'm being reasonable, and they're the ones who are being difficult. So I followed her instructions to the letter. Every text I received got a thoughtful reply, and every call was followed up with a detailed email. The binder of documents just kept growing. It was like a record of all our interactions. But instead of taking the supervised visit, something unexpected happened. 3 weeks after Alexis first showed up at my house, a process server came to my door at 8 a.m. I was still in my scrubs, sipping my coffee, when he handed me a manila envelope with the Burke County Superior Court seal. It was a petition for custody modification, filed by Alexis Marie Porter, with Madison Ann Porter and Robert James Porter as co-petitioners. I stood there in the doorway, reading through the summary, and it was like a punch to the gut. Allegation 1, I've been alienating Lauren from her biological family. Allegation 2, family reunification is in the best interest of the child. Allegation 3, they've been denied access to their granddaughter by me. I looked up from the filing, and through Lauren's open bedroom door I could see her bed. The sheets were pulled up neatly, just the way I'd taught her. The lavender blanket, faded and patched, was folded on top. It was 10 years old, and it held so many memories. Everything started with that blanket, and now it seemed like everything was coming back to it. I closed the front door, set the envelope on the kitchen counter, and finished my coffee. Then I called Karen. I had to know what to do next. "They filed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know," she replied. "I got the notice 20 minutes ago. I've been preparing for this since you told me about Alexis's visit." Karen had already compiled our response. She had the sealed adoption file, 8 years of monthly emails, CPS records, Timothy's affidavit, the recorded phone calls, and the timeline of Alexis's probate records access. We had everything we needed, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the judge to review it. If you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, you know how I felt in that moment. But here's the thing. I wasn't the same sister Alexis had left behind all those years ago. I was a woman who had spent 10 years building a life, one document at a time, one bedtime story at a time, one porch light left on at a time, and every single piece of it was in that file. Now this is where it gets interesting. Catherine's office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian in Marion, just 15 minutes from my house. Her desk was buried in files, but she could find anything in 30 seconds. She pulled out my binder. It was 3 inches thick now, with blue cover tabs labeled in my handwriting. "Walk me through it," she said, opening the binder flat between us. So I did. Tab 1 was the CPS report from the night of abandonment, Officer Reyes's notes, Danielle's placement assessment. Tab 2 was Madison's letter, filed during the guardianship hearing, requesting no further contact regarding this matter. Tab 3, if you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button. It really helps me know you're engaged. Now let's get back to the story. As I walked Catherine through the binder, I realized just how much evidence we had. It was like a puzzle, and every piece fit together perfectly. But here's the crazy part. Alexis thought she could just waltz back into our lives and disrupt everything we'd built. She didn't understand that I wasn't the same person she'd left behind. I was a mother now, and I would do anything to protect my child. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of the story. It's about to get even more intense. As I sat there with Catherine, going through the binder, I knew that we had a long road ahead of us, but I was ready for it. I had my evidence, I had my support system, and I had my daughter. Now let's see what happens next. You won't believe the twists and turns that are coming up. It's going to be a wild ride. 96 monthly emails, spanning 8 incredible years, and I had the evidence to prove it. But here's the thing. I only got one response, from Robert, and that was way back in month 7. Nothing after that. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button because it's about to get even more interesting. I had a whole binder full of documents, carefully organized into tabs. Tab 4 was all about Alexis's phone calls, the recordings, and the transcripts. But what's really surprising is that both calls were about money, and neither of them mentioned Lauren. Then there was tab 5, which contained the involuntary termination of parental rights, the adoption decree, and the sealed court record. And tab 6 had Timothy Garrett's affidavit, which named me as the sole trustee and explicitly excluded Alexis, Madison, and Robert. But what really caught my attention was tab 7, which had the timeline Karen had built. It showed that Alexis had accessed Timothy's probate filing online on September 3rd and then filed the custody petition on September 25th, just 22 days later. Karen closed the binder and looked at me with a determined expression. "We're not going to argue with their lawyer," she said. "We're not going to get emotional or give speeches. We're going to submit this file and let the judge read it. 9 years of documentation against 3 weeks of crocodile tears." She paused, and I could feel the weight of her words. "You built this, Ashley," she said. "Every email you sent, every call you logged, every receipt you filed. This is your case." But I looked at the binder, and I knew that wasn't true. My handwriting was on every tab, but this wasn't about me. "This is Lauren's," I said, feeling a surge of determination. Now this is where it gets interesting. Russell Drake, the lawyer, took my deposition in a conference room at his firm in Charlotte. He was a mid-50s man with a silver watch, the kind of lawyer who leaned forward when he asked questions, like proximity was a tactic. Alexis wasn't in the room. Just Drake, his paralegal, Karen, and a court reporter. Drake started soft, asking me if I loved Lauren and if I thought a child benefited from knowing her biological family. I agreed that a child benefits from stability and people who show up. But then he shifted, his smile thinning, and asked if I'd refused to let Lauren's grandparents visit. I told him I'd sent monthly updates for 8 years, and I had copies of every email. "Would you like to see them?" I asked. But Drake didn't want to see them. He moved on, asking if I'd concealed Lauren's biological father from the family. I told him no, that Timothy Garrett had contacted me and that Alexis had left without telling anyone she was pregnant, including him. "You're managing a trust worth nearly $300,000, he said. "Don't you think the biological family deserves some oversight?" But I was firm. Lauren is my family, legally and permanently. The trust was established by her biological father, who specifically chose me as trustee. Karen sat quietly through most of it, only intervening twice, once on a procedural objection, and once when Drake tried to introduce a line of questioning about my personal finances that had nothing to do with the custody petition. But the moment that mattered came near the end, when Drake asked if I'd ever spoken negatively about Alexis to Lauren. I looked at him evenly and told him the truth. I told Lauren her birth mother wasn't ready. That's all I said. Drake's pen stopped moving and his paralegal looked at the table. Karen told me afterward that he'd expected tears, but instead he got a binder and receipts. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story, because it's about to get even more intense. While Karen and I prepared for court, Madison went to church, to the First Baptist church she'd attended since before I was born. She told her version of the story to anyone who'd listen, the abridged, sympathetic cut. Our granddaughter was kept from us. Ashley wouldn't let us see her. We're just trying to be a family again. It worked on some people, and I noticed it at the Ingalls on Main Street, where Mrs. Hatcher, who'd known me since I was 12, looked past me in the cereal aisle like I was a smudge on the shelf. You won't believe what happens next, so stay tuned. Which part of this story surprises you the most so far? Drop it in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. You won't believe what happened next in this crazy story. 2 women from the choir were whispering when I picked up Lauren from church daycare, and I could tell they were talking about me. The youth pastor, Evan, asked me if everything was okay at home, but I just brushed it off. I didn't feel like explaining myself to anyone, not even him. I only confided in one person, Dr. Nguyen, my supervisor and friend. We grabbed a cup of coffee in the break room, and I told her everything. She listened attentively and then said, "Why don't you set the record straight?" But I knew I wasn't on trial in the church parking lot. I was on trial in a courtroom, and that's where the real evidence would come out. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. Now here's where it gets interesting. Madison's campaign wasn't as solid as she thought. Mrs. Colleen Brewer, a 72-year-old former Sunday school teacher, had a few words with Madison after a Wednesday prayer meeting. Mrs. Brewer had babysat Lauren twice when I was stuck at the clinic, and she knew my daughter like the back of her hand. She cornered Madison and said, "I've known that child her whole life. Ashley never kept anyone away. You chose not to come." Madison's face went blank, and she tried to deflect, saying, "You don't understand the full picture." But Mrs. Brewer wasn't having it. She shot back, "I understand an empty chair." Lauren found out about the drama the way kids always do, from another kid. A boy in her class, Tyler Meeks, told her at recess that his mom said Lauren's real mom wanted her back. Lauren came home that afternoon, quiet and withdrawn. She did her homework without talking, ate half her dinner, and took a bath without being asked. At bedtime, she climbed into my bed instead of hers, something she hadn't done since Timothy died. She pressed her back against mine and pulled the lavender blanket up to her chin, carrying it from her room like a shield. "Mama," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are they going to take me away?" I rolled over and looked at her, taking in those big brown eyes that looked just like Timothy's, and that chin that looked just like Alexis's. But her heart was entirely her own. Now this is where it gets really emotional. I told Lauren, "Nobody's taking you anywhere. You are my daughter, and the law says so. My heart says so, and I say so." She searched my face for a long time, trying to decide whether to believe me. Then she pressed her forehead against my shoulder and closed her eyes, fast asleep in just 5 minutes. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of what Alexis and my parents had done, not to me, but to this innocent 10-year-old girl who'd spent a week afraid that the word real meant something other than what she'd lived. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. It's about to get even more intense. The next morning, I called Karen and said, "Whatever it takes, I need this over." Karen filed 2 motions in the following week. The first requested that the sealed adoption records be made available for judicial review only, not public, not discoverable by the opposing party, but visible to Judge Harold Wilkinson in chambers. The grounds were that the records directly addressed the petitioner's legal standing. The second motion requested permission to introduce Timothy Garrett's notarized affidavit as evidence, a posthumous declaration by the child's biological father, filed with the trust and witnessed by his estate attorney. Russell Drake objected to both, arguing that the sealed records were irrelevant to a best interest analysis and that the affidavit was hearsay. But Judge Wilkinson reviewed the motions in chambers and granted both. The sealed file would be presented at the hearing, and Timothy's words would finally be heard. You won't believe what happens next. But here's the crazy part. The sealed records and Timothy's affidavit were just the beginning. The real question was, what would the judge decide? Would he grant Madison's petition, or would he rule in our favor? The uncertainty was killing me, and I knew I had to stay strong for Lauren's sake. Which part of this story surprises you the most so far? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. The waiting game was almost over, and I couldn't help but wonder what the next day would bring. Karen had filed a document she called the Timeline Exhibit, which was a simple yet powerful page that showed 2 key dates: September 3rd, the day Alexis accessed Timothy Garrett's probate records, and September 25th, the day the custody petition was filed. Those 22 days spoke volumes about Alexis's true intentions. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. Drake had asked for more time to prepare, but Judge Wilkinson wasn't having it. The child's stability was the top priority, and the hearing would proceed as scheduled. Karen called me that evening to confirm the hearing was set for October 14th. She reassured me that everything we needed was in the file, and I had to trust that it would be enough. But what if it wasn't? Karen's words still echo in my mind. Ashley, you've been building this case for 10 years. You just didn't know it. Those words gave me a sense of hope and determination. The hearing was just 3 weeks away, and I'd already waited a decade for this moment. 3 more weeks felt like a breeze compared to the years of uncertainty. As I prepared for the big day, I laid out my outfit on the bed, a navy blazer, white blouse, and gray slacks. I wanted to look professional, not impressive. I wanted to look like a nurse, a mother, and a woman who kept records. Lauren was fast asleep by 8:30, and I made her lunch for the next day, leaving a note on the bag. I love you. Dr. Tran will pick you up after school, and I'll be home by dinner. As I sat at the kitchen table with the binder, now 3 inches thick, I didn't need to read through it. I'd memorized most of it by now. Instead, I ran my hand over the cover, feeling the weight of every decision I'd made. Every tab represented a choice, from the CPS report to the emails, the recordings, and the adoption decree. It was all there, a culmination of 96 months of fighting for Lauren's well-being. I closed the binder, set it beside my keys, and walked through the house, checking locks and turning off lights. As I paused at the front door, I glanced at the porch light, the same yellow bulb that had been there for years. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the same courthouse where I'd signed guardianship papers 9 years ago, but this time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was answering for what I'd built. The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. and made myself a cup of coffee. My hands shook slightly as I poured the water, a first for me. I held the mug with both hands and drank it, standing at the counter, watching the sky lighten through the kitchen window. Then I got dressed, checked my reflection once, picked up the binder, and drove to the Burke County Courthouse. Catherine was waiting at the entrance, looking sharp in her charcoal suit, briefcase in one hand and take-out coffee in the other. She handed me the coffee without a word, and we walked in together. The courtroom was the same one I'd been to 3 times before, with its wood paneling, fluorescent lights, and American flag in the corner. I'd been here for guardianship, termination of parental rights, and adoption, each time leaving with more responsibility and less family. This would be the 4th time, and I was ready to face whatever came next. But here's the crazy part. Alexis was already seated on the left side of the gallery with Russell Drake, and I couldn't help but wonder what they were thinking. Now hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. As I took my seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of determination. I had come a long way, and I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. The judge would soon arrive, and the hearing would begin. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. You won't believe what happens next, so stay tuned. Which part of this story resonates with you the most? Drop it in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. She walked into the room with a sense of calm, wearing a cream blouse and pearl earrings that seemed to gleam in the light. Her expression was one of practiced concern, but I could sense a hint of nervousness beneath the surface. Madison sat behind her, as rigid as a fence post, with Robert by her side, his eyes fixed on the floor. I took a seat at the respondents' table, trying not to make eye contact with them, and opened the binder in front of me. Karen sat beside me, organizing 3 folders with a quiet efficiency. The room was silent, except for the sound of paper shuffling, as we waited for the hearing to begin. If you're enjoying this so far, smash that like button and let's keep going. The clerk called the room to order, and Judge Harold Wilkinson entered, his silver hair cropped close, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He reviewed the papers on his bench, his expression neutral, before speaking in a calm, measured tone. In the matter of the petition for custody modification regarding the minor child Lauren Rose Porter, case number 24, CVD 1847, I'd like to begin with the sealed file. Drake went first, calling Alexis to the stand. She walked to the witness chair with measured steps, dabbing her eyes with a tissue before she even sat down. "Miss Porter," Drake began, "can you describe your relationship with the minor child?" Alexis's voice trembled carefully as she spoke. "Lauren is my daughter. I gave birth to her. I loved her from the moment she was born. And why did you leave her with your sister?" Alexis looked at the judge, her eyes welling up with tears. "I was 26. I was alone. The father, Timothy, he didn't even know. My parents were ashamed of me. I didn't know what to do. I thought Ashley could give Lauren a better life while I got back on my feet. Did you intend to return?" "Always. I always planned to come back. But here's the crazy part. Ashley made it clear she wasn't welcome, and Alexis was cut off from her own child." Drake paused for effect, letting the weight of Alexis's words sink in. "Did you attempt to reconnect with your daughter?" "Many times. But Ashley, she made it clear I wasn't welcome. She cut me off from my own child." Alexis straightened in the chair, her voice taking on a sense of determination. "We're her real family. Blood is blood." Madison testified next, her polished grief and rehearsed helplessness on full display. "We begged Ashley to let us see Lauren. She refused every time. You kept her from us. That's what she did." Robert went last, sitting in the witness chair with a single note card, his voice cracking twice as he read from it. "Family should be together. We want to know our granddaughter. We have a right to that." He looked up once at me for half a second before looking back at his card. His shoulders caved inward, just slightly, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. Now this is where it gets interesting. Karen didn't cross-examine any of them, instead making 3 notes on her legal pad, underlining one and saying, "Your Honor, we'd like to present our response." Karen stood, her voice confident, as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A, the sealed adoption record of Lauren Rose Porter, previously admitted for judicial review." Judge Wilkinson had the file in front of him, and he'd been reading it while Alexis and my parents testified. Now he opened it fully, adjusting his glasses and turning pages. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of paper shuffling as he read through the documents. His expression was neutral for the first page, neutral for the second. By the third, something shifted, a tightening around his jaw, a slight narrowing of his eyes. He read Madison's letter, the CPS report from the night of abandonment, the TPR ruling, involuntary, based on abandonment. Alexis served by publication. No response. He read the adoption decree and then turned to the last section, Timothy Garrett's affidavit. He read it slowly, his finger tracing a line at the bottom of the page, the part where Timothy had underlined, "under no circumstances," twice. You won't believe what happens next, so stay tuned and hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. As the judge continued to read, the tension in the room grew, the air thick with anticipation. The sound of papers shuffling, the creak of chairs, seemed to take on a new significance, as if the very fate of Lauren Rose Porter hung in the balance. The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes seemed to bore into the pages, as if searching for something, anything that could change the course of events. And then, just as suddenly, he looked up, his eyes locking onto something or someone in the room. Which part of this story resonates with you the most? Drop it in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. The drama was far from over, and the next twist was just around the corner, so keep watching to find out what happens next. He read the file again, his eyes scanning the pages with a mix of curiosity and caution. Then he set it down, removed his glasses, and looked up at Alexis, who was seated at the petitioner's table, flanked by Madison and Robert. His gaze shifted to Russell Drake, before finally settling on me, "Miss Porter." The question he asked was straightforward. Does the petitioning party have any knowledge of the contents of this file? I understood what he was getting at, whether Alexis and my parents knew what they were up against, whether they grasped the weight of what they'd walked into. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button, and let's keep going. Your Honor, I replied, my voice even and quiet. They were present for every event documented in that file. They chose not to act on any of them. Judge Wilkinson held my gaze for a moment, his expression unreadable, Then he turned to Alexis and her attorney, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Do they have any idea what's in here?" I simply nodded, and Karen took over, walking the court through the file piece by piece, not rushing, not raising her voice. She laid out the facts with the precision of a doctor charting a patient's vitals, measured, sequential, impossible to misread. "Your Honor, the petitioner alleges systematic alienation, but the record tells a different story." She held up the email log, a detailed record of the respondents' attempts to reach out to Madison and Robert Porter over an 8-year period. The numbers were striking. 96 monthly emails, each including a photo of Lauren and an invitation to visit. Responses received? Just one, from Robert Porter in month 7. She read his reply aloud, her voice neutral. "She looks healthy." That was all. 8 years of invitations, and that was the only reply. The courtroom was silent, the only sound the soft rustle of papers. She held up Madison's letter from the guardianship hearing, reading it in full. "We do not oppose guardianship, but request no further contact regarding this matter." Then Karen pulled up the text message from Madison, sent the night of abandonment. She read it without inflection, her voice flat. "She's your burden now. Alexis made her mess. We're not cleaning it up." The courtroom was still. The only movement, Madison's face going pale as she gripped the edge of the bench with both hands. But here's the crazy part. Karen wasn't done yet. She turned to Alexis's phone calls, a total of 2 in 10 years. Neither call inquired about Lauren's health, education, or welfare. Both calls requested money. She played a 15-second clip from the second recording, Alexis's voice clear and sharp. "You owe me. You have my kid." The timeline was just as damning. Karen placed a single sheet on the overhead projector, highlighting 2 dates. September 3rd, the day Alexis accessed Timothy Garrett's public probate records online, and September 25th, the day the custody petition was filed. 22 days, Your Honor, between discovering that the child's deceased biological father left a trust valued at $278,000 and filing this petition. Now this is where it gets interesting. The true motives behind Alexis's actions began to unravel. She paused, surveying the courtroom before continuing. "This case isn't about a child. It's about a trust fund." Drake objected, but Judge Wilkinson overruled him, his expression unyielding. Karen read Timothy's affidavit aloud, the full text, and when she reached the final line, "Under no circumstances should custody or trust management be transferred to Alexis Marie Porter," Alexis's hands dropped to her lap. "Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story." Judge Wilkinson took less than 5 minutes to render his verdict, his glasses in one hand and the sealed file in the other. He spoke from the bench, his voice firm and authoritative. "The court has reviewed the sealed adoption record, the evidence presented by both parties, and the testimony of the petitioner and Koolo. The facts are as follows." He listed them without emotion, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. Alexis Marie Porter's parental rights were involuntarily terminated 7 years prior due to willful abandonment under North Carolina General Statute 7B 1111. She did not contest. She did not appeal. You won't believe what happens next, so keep watching. The adoption of Lauren Rose Porter by Ashley Elaine Porter was officially finalized, and all the paperwork was in order. The court records showed that everything was done by the book, with no mistakes or oversights. This meant that the person trying to change the custody arrangement had no legal ground to stand on. The judge made it clear, the petition was denied, and the case was closed for good. When it came to the grandparents' visitation rights, it turned out that they had chosen not to be involved in Lauren's life for her entire upbringing. Despite this, Ashley had made a real effort to keep them in the loop, and the evidence showed that she had done everything she could to include them. But what really raised some eyebrows was the timing of this petition. It was filed just 22 days after Lauren's inheritance was discovered, which made it seem like the grandparents were motivated by more than just a desire to spend time with their granddaughter. The judge denied their request for court-ordered visitation, and that's when things started to get heated. Alexis stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, and her voice cut through the courtroom. "That's my daughter. she said, her words trembling with emotion. "You can't do this. She's my blood. You stole my child." She pointed at Ashley, her eyes blazing with anger. "You stole everything." The bailiff stepped forward, trying to calm her down, but Alexis was having none of it. Drake tried to grab her arm, but she shook him off. "This isn't over," she warned, her voice low and menacing. The judge's voice was firm and commanding. "Remove the petitioner if she cannot maintain order," he said, and the bailiff escorted Alexis out of the courtroom. Madison and Robert followed, their faces set in determined lines. As they left, Robert turned back to Ashley and gave her a long, quiet look before walking out. The courtroom was empty now, except for Karen, who touched Ashley's arm and said, "It's done." Ashley sat there for a moment, taking it all in. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the clerk filed papers with a quiet rustle. The American flag in the corner of the room hung still, a symbol of justice and order. Ashley picked up her binder, tucked it under her arm, and walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was empty and quiet, with no sign of Alexis, Madison, or Robert. There was no dramatic confrontation in the parking lot, just the sound of Ashley's shoes on the courthouse tile and the warm October sun shining through the glass doors at the end of the hall. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button. It really helps us out. Ashley drove to Dr. Tran's house, a cozy brick rancher on the east side of town, with a beautiful garden out front and wind chimes on the porch. Lauren was sitting on the steps, reading a book, her shoes untied and her hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked up as Ashley pulled up, and a big smile spread across her face. "What happened?" she asked, running towards Ashley with a look of concern. Ashley knelt down on the grass and took Lauren's face in her hands. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, sweetie," she said, her voice filled with reassurance. "Not today, not ever." Lauren hugged her hard, bending the collar of her blazer. Dr. Nguyen stood in the doorway, watching the scene with a warm smile, and gave Ashley a nod of approval. That was all Ashley needed to see. They drove home with the windows down, the air filled with the smell of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It was a beautiful October day in the foothills, with the mountains turning copper and the light going gold by 4 in the afternoon. Lauren hummed a song from school, something about kindness, her voice slightly off-key. As they pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, just like it had been that morning when Ashley left, and every night for the past 10 years. Lauren ran up the steps and turned the doorknob, calling out, "Come on, Mama." Ashley stood in the driveway for a moment, taking a deep breath before following Lauren inside. They had a normal evening, doing homework, making spaghetti, and playing Uno. It was a normal, quiet night, and that was the greatest victory of all. But here's the crazy part. A week later, Madison called, her voice cold and clipped, the way it always was when she'd lost and needed someone to blame. "I hope you're satisfied," she said, her words dripping with venom. Ashley's response was calm and measured. "This was never about satisfaction, Mom. This was about Lauren. You turned this family into strangers." Madison's voice was icy. "You were strangers the night you closed your door." The line went quiet, and then Madison hung up. Ashley didn't call back. She just let it go. Now this is where it gets interesting, the aftermath of the court case and how it affected the family. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of the story. As Ashley reflected on the events that had transpired, she realized that the court case was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The real challenge would be navigating the complexities of their relationships and finding a way to heal and move forward. You won't believe what happens next, so keep watching. Which one surprised you the most? The court's decision or the reaction of the family members? Drop it in the comments and let's discuss. I placed the phone on the counter and began making dinner, the familiar scent of cooking food filling the air. Alexis had disappeared again, back to her silence, back to Charlotte. But this time, the distance was my choice, and that made all the difference. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Robert, just 3 lines, handwritten on plain white paper, folded twice. The words still lingered in my mind. I should have done better, I know that now. I'm sorry. I read it at the kitchen table, Lauren doing her homework across from me, her pencil scratching against the paper. I didn't share it with her, instead folding it and placing it in the binder, between the adoption papers and trust documents. I didn't throw it away, nor did I write back. Some apologies come too late to deserve a response, but are too genuine to be discarded. As I stood on the porch that Saturday night, the crickets provided a soothing background hum, the cool air a refreshing breeze. The mountains loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. I couldn't help but think back to the same spot 10 years ago, where I'd picked up a baby wrapped in a lavender blanket, a one-line note pinned to her carrier. Now, that baby was inside, 10 years old, safe and sound, sleeping with the same blanket, now patched twice, and loved beyond threadbare. Family isn't something you're born into. It's a promise you keep, one morning at a time, one bedtime story at a time, one porch light left on at a time. Nobody who walks away from that promise for 10 years gets to redefine it in a courtroom. If you're still with me, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story resonated with you the most? But here's the thing. It's the little things that matter, the everyday choices that define us. 96 emails, 2 phone calls about money, 1 lavender blanket patched twice, 1 binder 3 inches thick, 1 sealed file that held 10 years of proof that showing up matters more than showing off. If you've ever been the one who stayed, who chose the hard road, who chose the quiet love that nobody applauds, then this story is yours. You know, it's the people who stay, who choose to love and care for others, that truly make a difference. So if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them, and let's keep the conversation going. What does family mean to you?